the large structures that these offshore wind mills would be. We've been involved in this process for years now, close to 10 years, and it's been my impression that the regulatory process is at every level is being rushed. Due diligence is not being done by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management or by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Plans are constantly being changed. For instance, the current offshore leases off Maryland begin at 10 miles offshore. The companies pledged that they would not build anything closer than 17 miles offshore until they changed their mind and decided that they are going to build 10 miles offshore. The size of the windmills have grown tremendously from the time the project was first developed, so that concerns about effect on the viewscape, for instance, have become much more serious as the project went forward. Now recently, since December of 2022, the nation watched in disbelief as 14 whales washed up along the East Coast, including a humpback on the shore of Assateague Island. As elected officials sought answers, NOAA claimed that they had been studying, quote, unusual mortality events involving 174 humpback whales along the entire U.S. East Coast since January of 2016, claiming long before there were exploration vessels for offshore wind development. According to the NOAA agency spokeswoman, quote, that period predates offshore wind preparation activities in the region. But to be clear, the statement that unusual mortality events predates offshore wind preparation activities is demonstrably false. As listed on BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management website, in 2015 to 2016, BOEM executed 8 offshore wind leases off the New Jersey, New York, and Massachusetts coast. And in 2016 began geotechnical and site characterization surveys in those areas. Those surveys included geotechnical testing, more commonly known as sonar blasting. NOAA had to get incidental harassment authorizations to do them, and that began in 2016, right when the spike in whale deaths occurred. Now that's not all, and just to go on with the whale death issue. Following the public cry over the many whale deaths, NOAA released the following statement, quote, at this point there is no evidence to support speculation that noise resulting from wind development-related site characterization surveys could potentially cause mortality of whales. Now, that may be true. There is no evidence to support the speculation, but there is no evidence to deny the speculation, especially since NOAA, is not conducting what's called a level B necropsy on the whales, which is what it would take to find out if there was, in fact, ear damage in the whales that would lead to subsequent vessel strikes or subsequent mortality. So, in fact, NOAA just chooses not to really investigate what's really happening in this. But that's not all. The electric costs, in addition to much-needed research into the effects of offshore wind on things like marine mammals, Maryland electric ratepayers should also be very concerned about supply chain and rising cost issues in the offshore wind industry. In fact, an article in this morning's Wall Street Journal pointed out how economically unfeasible these projects have become unless these costs are passed on to taxpayers or ratepayers. The foreign wind energy companies who hold the Maryland offshore leases, and by the way, the two companies are Ørsted, foreign-owned, Danish, and cleverly named U.S. Wind, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of an Italian company, a wholly owned subsidiary. So these foreign wind energy companies who hold the leases are now indicating that the projects may no longer make economic sense, and I expect they will be going back to the Public Service Commission or the state legislature to get more money for the projects. This money will have to come from taxpayers or from Maryland electric customers already facing sky-high electric bills. Of protests from the Department of Defense and from NASA, who said that those leasing areas would adversely affect our ability to maintain national security, and in the case of NASA, the ability to to interfere with the Wallops Flight Center. So I believe it's time to reconsider whether offshore wind is the right approach for Maryland. Congressman Smith.
Dr. Andy Harris, thank you so very much for convening this very important hearing, and it's great to join my good friend and colleague from New Jersey, Dr. Van Drew. This hearing is extraordinarily important, but above all, I want to thank you for your decades-long effort to try to expose the potential harmful effects of ocean wind development. You have asked the hard questions over and over and over again, only to get crickets from NOAA and from BOEM and others. Even when you, years ago, asked about the crabs, the horseshoe crabs, which are very important with regards to medicine. Nothing. And they are put at risk, and it could lead to loss of medical interventions. And that's just one of many of the important works that you have done. You have been a true leader, and I want to thank you. And I know Jeff feels the same way. Thank you, Dr. My name is Chris Smith. I'm a congressman from the state of New Jersey. I'm currently serving in my 44th year as a member of the House. I got elected with Ronald Reagan. That's how far back it goes. And I enjoyed every single minute of it. But this kind of issue is the kind of thing where when you have panelists like you see, Jeff's done a great job on this, of course, Dr. Harris, we can make and we will make the difference in trying to expose, again, the myriad of harms that ocean wind development will impose upon each and every one of us. In just the past 2.5 months, 3 major industrial wind development companies have pulled out of their industrial wind farm projects off our Atlantic coast. The remarkable about-face in which Ørsted and Equinor and BP stated that the projects were, quote, economically unsustainable, is even more stunning in light of the massive tax subsidies and lavish praise that they received from the Biden administration and from, in my state, Governor Murphy. And Jeff has been on this, too, for so many years, asking the hard questions, especially of Ørsted, and again, getting very weak and very unavailing types of answers. Both the Biden and Murphy administrations refuse to even listen to the numerous warnings from local leaders, the mayors, the state senators. I know Mary Beth Carrozza is here, and she's a longtime leader, and she knows government, having worked on Capitol Hill for so long, but now as your state senator. Hard questions being raised by scientists, by activists, environmentalists, those who are in the fishing industry, so many across the board, not being listened to. And not even, like canaries in coal mines, the spate of tragic whale and dolphin deaths, and a well-founded suspicion that the geographical surveys, including the use of sonar, may be contributing causes, have brought new light and increased scrutiny to the fast-tracking of approximately 3,400 offshore wind turbines covering 2.4 million acres, all embedded into the ocean floor by pile drivers or floated off our Atlantic coast. And let's not forget, there's a 4-part process in this. The 4th part of the process, after they're put into the seabed, 20 years or less later, they're decommissioned. They're no longer going to be used. What happens to all that junk that is out there in the ocean because they don't plan on using them past a possible 20-year useful life? Despite our calls for an honest review, offshore wind industrialization has left unaddressed and unanswered so many questions. So much so that in March of last year, Andy Harris, Jeff Van Drew, and I offered an amendment that passed 244 to 189 to have the watchdog of Congress, the Government Accountability Office, investigate the impacts of wind turbines. And their audit will be coming out very soon. We asked about every possible way of looking at this. Its impact on national security, its impact, its survivability if we get a Category 3 hurricane. There's at least one study in 2012 that said half of these things will topple over like dominoes if we have a Cat 3 hurricane. And other categories, of course, will cause irreparable damage. Another amendment that the 3 of us offered, was put forth to the FAA Reauthorization Act in July. That too passed. And that requires the president or his designee to certify that offshore wind turbine projects in the North Atlantic and Mid-Atlantic areas, our areas, will, and this is the operative language of the bill, which again we authored, will not weaken, degrade, interfere with, or nullify the capability of radar relied upon by the FAA or our armed services. BOEM has failed to consider the impact of this. We asked at a hearing of the National Resources Committee, Director Klein, very specific questions about the issue of radar and what it will do to our national security and our boats, who will be seeing shadowing, as they call it, where they think there's something there and it's not. It's really, really troubling. The National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released a report in 2022, and I thank Megan for making us all aware of that report, entitled Wind Turbine Generator Impacts to Marine Vessel Radar, and they found that wind turbine generators, quote, this is their words just a year ago, obfuscate the marine vessel radar for radar and will cause significant interference and shadowing that suppresses the detection of small contacts. They also said, and this is equally troubling, that wind turbine mitigation techniques for marine vessel radar have not, I say again, have not been substantially investigated, implemented, matured, or deployed. So we're blind. We have no idea what this is going to do to our military, to all the vessels that make their way into our ocean, as well as jets that are flying over and aircraft of every kind. So I raised that, and we raised that, and we're waiting for that amendment, hopefully to be approved by the Senate. You look around the world, the United Kingdom has spent 3 years trying to mitigate the effects on their radar to no avail. And then Coast Guard. We have Coast Guard stations in our district. We know how important they are for search and rescue, particularly in bad weather. Where's the study that shows how they're going to be able to find, and for their safety, how they're able to get back safely after making a rescue in very, very bad weather? So, you know, and Dr. Harris mentioned a moment ago, the Wall Street Journal's article is something everybody should read. It says, the multi-billion-dollar clean energy bet gone wrong. That's the headline, because they are insolvent and require billions of taxpayer dollars. Again, this hearing helps to bring more light and more scrutiny that we have not had from the administrations in your governorship in Maryland nor in ours. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Dr. Van Drew.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Before I start, I just want to thank Dr. Andy Harris for having this. We had a wonderful meeting that the three of us attended in my district in Wildwood, New Jersey. And by the way, we have an Ocean City, New Jersey, as well as an Ocean City, Maryland. And to put everything to rest, they are both equally as beautiful. How about we leave it at that? And of course, my friend Chris Smith, a little known secret is that, and we never would have known that it would have actually come to this, Chris and I, a few years ago, actually graduated from the same high school in the same class, a small Catholic high school. It's kind of crazy world, isn't it? These are two, you should be very proud, and I mean this, of both of these representatives, and I know most of the folks here from Dr. Harris's district. You have a great congressman who works so hard. I'm proud to be associated with them. I'm proud to be associated with both. So, you know, this is quite a story. Years ago, I started with this. And, you know, at first you thought I was in the state Senate when this started happening, the New Jersey State Senate. And it sounded like, gee, windmills. And all of us had this vision in our head, foolishly, until we looked into it. Windmills, you know, the innocent, beautiful, bucolic windmills that you see in Holland and some other areas of the country. How could that be a bad thing? Here's the deal. The more that you look into this, the more that you find out, the more that you learn, the more dangerous it is. And boy, it's an evolution. And I just ask people, you know, I saw some people as we were coming in and they had posters up and said, you know, for the environment, you know, let's have these wind turbines or to be green. There's nothing green about this. The only green about this or the dough, the money that's going to go, the billions of dollars, into a lot of investors' pockets who couldn't give a damn less about our beautiful coast. But you know, let's go through the issues. So you start and you think about what's near and dear to you, near and dear to me, tourism. It's so important. You're going to have these, depending on which project it is, in the Orsted project, and there's Atlantic Shores in our area as well, and further north there's even Empire. But Orsted, I'll go to that project because thank God they left, and I want to talk a little bit about why they left and what happened. But you look at Orsted, and they have the nerve, and because this is a mixed crowd, and I don't know all of you to say what they had to do this, but believe me, I think you know, to come to us and say, well, we did a study. This is true. I'm not making this up. We did a study, and probably in just one of my counties, I have 6 counties in my district. In one of my counties, Cape May County, in Cape May County, we estimate it will only be a $1.2 billion loss in tourism dollars. Can you imagine having the guts to come to us and say that when they initially maintained it wouldn't affect tourism at all? We know it's going to hurt tourism. Every study shows that it will hurt tourism. Everybody who's invested in the coast and the shore, everybody who loves the shore, whether they only make it here one day a year or here for the entire summer and spring and autumn, we know it's going to hurt, and the statistics prove it. And you know what showed more than anything, and it was almost biblical in nature, the whales, these beautiful mammals, these beautiful animals that live in our ocean that God has blessed us with. And one after another, dozens in our area washed ashore. Record amount. And they said, gee, it was coincidental. It was shipping accidents with boats. Well, the same boats are traveling the same routes at the same times that they always have. So don't tell me that garbage. It's not true. That wasn't the reason. And you're going to hear why it wasn't that reason, because of the testing they were doing where they were going to place these things, and they went way beyond the limits. Because, ladies and gentlemen, they don't care about our ocean. They don't care about our environment. They don't care about any of it. They're here to make money. They're not even American companies, and they're fossil fuel companies, some of them as well, so they're not so pure. How crazy is it that we would allow foreign-owned companies to do this to our American coast? How crazy and wrong is it that we would allow them to get away with that and to own and control our energy? America is an exceptional nation. It is the best nation, in my mind, still in the world. Don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. It is, and that's what this big argument is about. This is in one piece, and I don't want to digress of an argument whether Americanism and exceptionalism exist. They do. We know it, and we'll stand up for it, and we'll fight for it, and this is part of it. And as the congressman so well articulated, national defense, originally and quietly, if you speak with the Coast Guard, and we have the only training center, happens to be in my district in Cape May in the country, but we all have the Coast Guard facilities, they're real concerned. The Pentagon was real concerned. They were squashed. They were told to be quiet. But the reality is it interferes with radar. You can't have the number. And by the way, just one project in our area, Orsted, which finally left. I'm not exaggerating. These aren't talking points. Millions of acres with thousands of turbines. Nobody ever envisioned this. And they knew that it endangered our national security. They don't care. They know that they've never been tested. Again, as both congressmen mentioned, never been tested in hurricane force winds. We don't know how they're going to do, but a lot of what we do know is that they're not going to do well. Yeah, they've been in Europe, and by the way, some of them are being dismantled, but they've been in Europe. They get bad storms. They don't get hurricanes the way you do in Ocean City, Maryland, or Ocean City, New Jersey. It's a different story. They don't get the same nor'easters that we get. And you know, it is all about money. So when the whales died, man, everybody started noticing, thank God. Because in the beginning, to be honest with you, you were just talking into the wind. People didn't see it. They didn't understand it. It didn't sound bad. It's changed a lot. You need to talk to your friends. You need to talk to your colleagues. You need to talk to your neighbors and let them know and understand how serious this is. It's not about green energy. It's not about saving the environment. It's not about the carbon footprint, damn it. They say that it is, but when you really speak to the scientists, they say it will have no visible, tangible effect on that. So what happened? Why did Ørsted leave in my area? And again, I have the largest district geographically in the state of New Jersey, so we still have a fight ahead, and I'm fighting, I don't care what part of the country it is, because it's worth doing. I gotta tell you what you gotta do. You gotta keep up the public relations. You gotta keep making noise. You gotta keep screaming about what this is. You have to raise money. In my district, private business people, good people, everybody from the bottom up, not just wealthy people, but wealthy people included, we've raised almost $1 million. One of our counties has instituted a lawsuit. Other towns are suing. We have up to 7 lawsuits now, some of them by private people who are real concerned. Almost $1 million we've raised. We've got to keep up the fight. It is all about money. They're going to make billions of dollars. It's internationalism, and it's a term people are afraid to say, but it's globalism. It's not Americanism. So if I was to give advice, you know, they asked me what worked getting Ørsted out. Yeah, they had supply chain problems. Yeah, they had problems with inflation. God knows we all do. But they had problems with public relations. They had problems because the tide was turning, because thousands, millions of people actually in the state were really getting very concerned. And we kept the pressure up. Twist them up in court. Tie them up. Fight against them. Rally against them. We had rally after rally after rally. This is a hard fight. We won a battle. We've won a couple battles. The congressmen that you see here have fought those battles. But ladies and gentlemen, we have a war to win. Do not succumb. Do not be weak. And we will prevail. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Van Drew. We're going to go ahead to our opening statement by our panelists. And our panelists today, we're very fortunate to have regional and national experts on the subject of offshore wind, its effect in the local areas, as well as in general, the economic and environmental effects of these kinds of projects. The first panelist is Megan Lapp from the Center for Sustained Fisheries.
Thank you, Congressman, for allowing me to speak today. My name is Megan Lapp, and I represent Seafreeze, a Rhode Island commercial fishing company. We own 5 federally permitted commercial fishing vessels and 2 shoreside facilities. Our vessels, due to operational constraints, will be unable to safely harvest or transit through offshore wind farms. As BOEM has leased over 2.3 million acres of the East Coast to date and is preparing to lease more, we are rapidly losing our place of business. Our elected representatives are going to have to decide if they want U.S. harvested seafood and national food security, or if they want foreign government-owned offshore wind energy. You can't have both. I'd like to focus my comments on 2 particular issues today. The first is the very concerning question of maritime safety posed by offshore wind, and the second is the disparity in treatment between ocean industries by the federal government. Offshore wind farms interfere with all classes of marine radar, which is a major safety hazard. There is no current solution. For many years, I requested that the U.S. Coast Guard conduct a radar interference modeling study on the size and number of offshore wind turbines being planned for off our coast. They refused. Yet in 2019, prior even to the 2022 National Academies of Science report that confirmed this threat, The Coast Guard had admitted that its own vessels would be impacted by offshore wind radar interference. The Coast Guard also admitted that it does not conduct an independent radar interference analysis, even on its own vessel capabilities, instead leaving this to the developer's own navigational risk assessment. More recently, the U.S. Air Force requested that Congress enact legislation to prevent construction of wind farms within 2 nautical miles of the nation's nuclear missile silos, specifically due to the need to fly helicopters in those areas. According to the Air Force, wind turbines create both physical obstacles and turbulence that make wind farms, quote, really dangerous to fly into with a helicopter. The Coast Guard uses helicopters as a primary tool for maritime search and rescue. If flying helicopters in wind farms is dangerous for the Air Force, the same is true for the Coast Guard. In fact, the official Coast Guard transcript regarding a fishing vessel sinking off Rhode Island in 2019 states 6 times that one of the reasons for aborting the helicopter search for potential survivors, in addition to poor weather conditions, was hazards in the area which were identified as the Block Island wind farm turbines. There are only 5 of those, not the thousands planned coastwide. Vessels don't sink in good weather, they sink in bad weather when visibility is poor, when vessel radar needs to work, and helicopters need to fly low. The fact is that a major mission of the U.S. Coast Guard, that of search and rescue, will be compromised due to offshore wind farm interference with its own vessels' radar and helicopter operations. Yet it still has not conducted any comprehensive assessment of the level of reduction in its own capabilities due to offshore wind. This means that U.S. mariners' lives will be put at risk, and there is no plan to ensure that rescue is possible. The second issue, that of the discrepancy between federal treatment of ocean industries, is staggering. Last year's surge of large baleen whale deaths on the East Coast, coinciding with unprecedented offshore wind seismic survey activity, led to calls by 30 coastal New Jersey mayors, as well as Congressman Harris, Van Drew, and Smith, for a pause on further offshore wind surveying until an investigation of any link between the surveys and whale deaths could be completed. NOAA and BOEM's response was to deny any potential correlation, despite the fact that NOAA had already issued and was in the process of issuing many incidental take authorizations to offshore wind companies for the simple fact that marine mammals can be harmed by the activities. NOAA's own documents state that offshore wind surveys are expected to cause temporary deafness of marine mammals, which can lead to, quote, serious effects. That repeated exposure to temporary deafness can lead to permanent deafness, but that there is no data on noise-induced hearing loss for baleen whales, exactly the species that were washing up dead. This would seem to warrant a pause, including to determine if deafness were leading to ship strikes in the busy shipping channels of the area. However, a pause and investigation were denied. Another offshore energy industry, also regulated by BOEM and required to obtain incidental take authorizations from NOAA for seismic survey activity, is the oil and gas industry in the Gulf of Mexico. NOAA authorizations issued for these surveys actually contain a requirement for a full survey shutdown in the event of a marine mammal live stranding within 50 kilometers of survey operations. Additionally, the authorizations provide for an investigation of any marine mammal strandings in the vicinity of surveys if circumstances suggest that survey activities could have caused the strandings. In other words, had the whale deaths coincided with oil and gas surveys instead of offshore wind surveys, the pause and investigation requested by the congressman would have been standard procedure. Additionally, most of the survey equipment used by these two industries is the same. For example, the sparkers authorized for use in the Gulf of Mexico surveys, which the corresponding Federal Register notice states have the potential to cause incidental take of marine mammals, are the exact brand and model as those contained in the incidental take authorization for an offshore wind survey off the New Jersey and New York coasts. The level of impact authorized to mammals is also the same. The incidental take authorizations for both industries are issued pursuant to the Marine Mammal Protection Act. That act is designed to protect marine mammals, not particular industries. The requirements for the same activity with the same equipment with the potential to have the same impact on these animals should be the same. I would dare to guess the law requires it. Unlike the Gulf of Mexico, the U.S. East Coast is a migratory corridor for many species of large baleen whales, including the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. As we speak, there are multiple 10-knot vessel speed restriction zones from Maine to North Carolina designed to protect the whales along this migration corridor, where many offshore wind surveys are approved and ongoing. In fact, due to the critically endangered status of these whales, NOAA is considering a coast-wide 10-knot speed restriction zone for 6 months out of the year for all vessels, commercial and recreational, 35 feet and longer, which has the potential to seriously affect various ocean users, without considering a corresponding 6-month ban on offshore wind activities. It is the same species that NOAA was willing to shut down the entire Maine lobster industry to protect, even though there has not been a reported right whale entanglement in Maine lobster gear for 20 years and never a reported death. But if the offshore wind industry continues to receive a pass from the U.S. government, a pass no other industry gets, the only entity to pay the price on the East Coast will be the commercial fishing industry. Because when whale populations decline, regardless of cause, the fishing industry receives regulations, even if nobody else does. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very, very much. And I'm just going to add that, we plan to actually have 9 seats over on that side of panelists, and we invited U.S. Wind, and we invited the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and we invited the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Never heard back from U.S. Wind, and the other 2 federal agencies declined to attend. I suspect that when you hear what some of the panelists have to say, as you just heard, you might understand why they might have declined to attend. The next panelist is Mr. Robert Rand from Rand Acoustics. Mr. Rand.
Thank you, Congressman, for the opportunity to speak today and for your attention to the matter of offshore wind noise. My name is Robert Rand. I'm the owner of Rand Acoustics, LLC, with over 4 decades of expertise in acoustics, including industrial noise control, numerous environmental impact assessments, and 10 years in the Noise and Vibration Group at Stone & Webster Engineering, working in power generation. I know how to measure sound. I use calibrated Type 1 and research-grade instrumentation. More than that, I care about whales. They are beautiful creatures. I've been involved in sonar noise impact analysis since 1999. I've recorded vibrant, healthy humpback whale populations in Hawaii and sparse, depleted, endangered right whales off of Cape Cod. With increasing reports of whale and dolphin deaths along the eastern seaboard, in May of 2023, I measured underwater sound levels from a wind industry sonar survey vessel operating 43 miles off of the New Jersey coast. In November of 2023, I measured underwater sound levels from pile driving operations southwest of Nantucket. I released my sonar survey technical report in September of 23. It's online at my website. I will release the pile driving technical report shortly. These surveys provide what I believe are the first independent calibrated measurements of offshore wind industry sonar and pile driving underway off the eastern seaboard. Sonar sparker bang-bang sounds underwater were loud at 2 nautical miles, and as we got closer to the ship, they got louder. The noise data were consistent with manufacturer test data. Those are a full 16 decibels louder than the proxy substitute sound levels NOAA allowed the developer to use for permitting. The deficient proxy levels in the application allow much shorter distances for species monitoring and mitigation actions. NOAA also treated the vessel as if it was silent and omitted vessel noise impact assessment on propulsion and dynamic positioning thrusters. The behavioral harassment threshold for continuous sound was 2 kilometers, much farther than permit distances. The sonar vessel used impulsive and swept sonars in the 20 to 30 kilohertz range, easily measured at 1 kilometer, and that does affect some species who can hear in that range. Those weren't even listed in the permit application. It appears that NOAA has no idea what the sound vessels are using or how loud they are. The pile driving noise measured as loud as seismic air guns used for geophysical oil and gas exploration, even with NOAA's required noise mitigation technologies. These levels are far too loud to be permitted anywhere near whale habitat. The high sonar and pile driving noise levels and irregularities in project and regulatory documents raise strong concerns about insufficient review and mitigation distances to protect the critically endangered right whale and other marine species from behavioral harassment and hearing impacts. I did these surveys on my own dime because I care about whales and I know how to measure noise. In 2016, NOAA classified vessel strikes and noise as high threats to whale species. Offshore wind development brings high threat noise to marine species. It's too loud. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. The next panelist is Lisa Linois of the Wind Action Group.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. For the record, my name is Lisa Linois. Since 2006, I've served as the Executive Director and spokesperson for the Wind Action Group, where we track and report on the costs and impacts of large-scale wind energy. So as you can imagine, it was predominantly onshore, and now we've turned our attention to offshore. In 2021, I assisted in the formation of the Save Right Whales Coalition, and our work at the coalition is the focus of my testimony today. Offshore wind, as we've heard today, is a very complicated topic where the risks are widespread, ranging from tourism, fishing, commercial and historic resources, air and sea navigation, military readiness, national security, and of course the environment. All of those we've looked at very closely, especially the military side, so I hope we could get questions on that. Specific to the whales, the notion that NOAA and BOEM have fully investigated and assessed the risks of the offshore wind development and are prepared to mitigate for the harms is absolutely false. Case in point, researchers at the New England Aquarium who are under contract with the wind developers have stated that the first projects built will serve as test beds to measure the impacts and devise effective mitigations. In October 2022, NOAA released its NOAA and offshore wind strategy. In October 2022, NOAA released its North Atlantic right whale and offshore wind strategy report. It was intended to figure out how they're going to deal with the impacts from offshore wind on whales. So that was only a little over a year ago. They're still trying to figure it out. And that report, that draft document, did not include mitigations beyond monitoring the effects. So, but any research on mitigations will take years to validate. The Biden administration has already approved 6 offshore wind projects totaling nearly 8,000 megawatts. 2 of these projects, Vineyard Wind and South Fork, are under construction. They started putting pile driving turbines into the seabed last spring. And 2 other projects, Revolution Wind and the Dominion project off the coast of Virginia, are rapidly nearing that phase. There is no intent to halt the project development for the purposes of researching the effects, nor is there any certainty that the mitigations for harms will even be possible. In the context of the North Atlantic right whale, a species on the verge of extinction, it will take years to understand the level of impact, and by that point, it will be too late. The race to meet an arbitrary goal of 30,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2030 has already negatively impacted marine life in the Atlantic, despite repeated claims from BOEM and NOAA to the contrary. What follows is a quick overview of what we learned in our research, some of what you've heard today. First, the pattern of whale deaths in the Atlantic is positively correlated with the increase in offshore wind activities in the wind lease areas. The year 2023 was not an anomaly, but a continuation of increased whale deaths that started in 2016, exactly when the offshore wind development began. 2, NOAA data show that as many as 7 North Atlantic right whales were found dead on or near Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts between August 2017 and August 2018. Aggregate vessel tracks in the same period show intensive wind sonar activity in the wind lease area immediately south of the island. 3, since Block Island wind projects started construction in 2016, 5 verified humpback whale deaths have been observed either on Block Island or in the immediate vicinity of the turbines. NOAA data do not show any humpback whale deaths on Humpback Island, on Block Island prior to 2016. As we saw in 2023, these deaths on Block Island and Martha's Vineyard are not isolated, but both part of a larger pattern of increased mortality that NOAA has yet to explain. 4, since 2016, NOAA has issued incidental harassment authorizations, or IHAs, for offshore wind work in the Atlantic, where the scale in acres impacted and the duration of the activity and the number of instances of take exceed other activities nationwide. By the end of 2023, active and pending IHA applications authorized nearly 600,000 instances of take of marine mammals, including, ready for this, 1,000 right whales. If I could remind you, there are less than 340 right whales on the planet today. Finally, we learned that over the course of the few years beginning in 2016, NOAA has systematically relaxed the conditions meant to protect marine life during sonar work. Specifically, NOAA reduced the number of protective species observers required during survey activities from 4 to 2. These are the individuals that are on the boats that are looking for the whales to make sure they're not in the area when the sonar is occurring. They allowed nighttime sonar activity to continue even after recognizing that passive acoustic monitoring or machine listening was ineffective during sonar mapping. They removed the requirement that noise from offshore wind vessels be regulated, which meant NOAA did not protect marine life from noise levels it had already deemed harmful. And finally, it failed to hold wind developers accountable for NOAA's requirements for reporting accurate source sonar levels. The significance of this last point cannot be overstated. NOAA's own record shows that the sonar NOAA approved is producing harmful noise levels at distances that exceed the protective setbacks defined by the agency, which is what Mr. Rand spoke about. Consequently, the protective setbacks are not protective at all. Marine mammals are likely getting closer to the sonar than they should be allowed. This issue, coupled with the increase in vessel activity to, from, and within the wind lease area, is disrupting whale movement. It is for these reasons that we believe whales have been dying. If no action is taken to investigate this further, the deaths will continue as the development increases. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Linos. Now, the opening statement by Bonnie Brady from the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Congressman Harris, Smith, and Van Drew, and invited guests, good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify today. My name is Bonnie Brady. I am the Executive Director of the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association based in Montauk, New York. We represent commercial fishermen from all gear types and ports throughout Long Island, where 99% of New York's wild-caught seafood is landed. I'm also a founding member of the Responsible Offshore Development Alliance. RODA is a membership-based fishing industry coalition committed to improving the compatibility of offshore development with their businesses. They represent thousands of commercial fishing-dependent crews, shoreside employees, and seafood infrastructure businesses throughout the United States. Commercial fishermen are as varied as the seafood they catch. They fish inshore or offshore, different times of year, different gear types, and varying ocean depths. Just as fish do not recognize state borders, fishermen may operate in areas spatially rather than by state boundaries. An offshore wind farm off Maryland can even impact New York fishermen who fish from New York to the Hague line, North Carolina to the Hague line. And while we don't fish in Ocean City, New York's boats have steamed back and forth through Maryland state and nearby federal waters to land fish in Virginia and North Carolina ports for decades. So any impediment put in the way of transiting to port becomes a matter of safety. Today, I'd like to highlight what I believe are the most pressing challenges facing commercial fishing industry because of offshore wind development. First is the lack of public information about offshore wind and the effects it will have on the fisheries and ocean ecosystems. Siting is the most important stage in which to avoid and minimize conflicts, and early coordination is key. BOEM has had minimal to no contact with commercial fishing experts in the siting process, only including them after the project design is locked in via power purchase agreements at the local or state level. When leasing decisions are discussed, fishermen often find they have done so only after key decisions are made, or they spoke in the wrong forum or in the wrong region. Even when the concerns of fishing communities are solicited, which is rare, too often it's too late to effect change. LICFA tried for years to work with federal and state agencies and developers to improve inclusion and make sure decisions were based on a cohesive understanding of the ocean. ROTA was created to help amplify our collective voices on the water for this kind of site planning. In September of 2020, ROTA submitted a petition on behalf of 3,300 signatories, representing some 150,000 fishing community members, echoing previous requests for fisheries mitigation measures to be required before any project was permitted. Shortly thereafter, the new administration approved the Vineyard Wind 1 project with no meaningful mitigation requirements, even after the previous administration confirmed revoking the project requested by the developer. Multiple projects have since been approved with zero consideration of the importance of domestic seafood production. Of late, we've seen procurement agreements canceled, but with new mandates and rebidding right around the corner, development is all but guaranteed, shutting us out of ways to protect our industry and the environment. The consolidation of federal decision-making power under BOEM means that other agencies have been ignored, considering fisheries at the last stage of its federal review. By then, alternatives are severely limited by developer state decisions, even though the lease is in federal waters. Federal agencies are instead deferring to multinational or foreign government-owned energy companies, advertising the permanent installation of turbines as solely a good thing for our oceans, prioritizing build-out goals at the expense of this nation's wild-caught seafood security. By losing access to fishing grounds for multiple fisheries and direct access to ports throughout our coastlines, our entire commercial fishing industry and its infrastructure will be gutted. Offshore wind development is an ocean use that directly conflicts with commercial fishing and has significant impacts on the marine ecosystems. The current process fails to improve environmental review and project decision-making, ensure navigational safety, remove roadblocks to planning processes, enhance fisheries research, and develop solutions to transmission issues other than to create unfishable no-go zones. Instead of avoiding environmental impacts to fishermen up front, federal and state governments are pushing to pay off fishermen impacted by offshore wind leases. Yet the government's partner, states and offshore wind developers, the same folks who have ignored us throughout the siting process, are calculating the fees. Once again, we are left at the curb. Plus, it's a one-and-done fund with no replenishment. Let's be clear, fishermen do not want to bail out. They want to fish and preserve their industry. Payoffs will not preserve communities and fails to consider what it will do to shoreside infrastructure or seafood markets. Offshore wind energy has the lowest power density with the largest footprint, so impacts to ecology and biodiversity can only be minimized or mitigated if we know the trade-offs. Few studies exist on how offshore wind development will impact our fishing operations or the species they rely on. And renewable energy's politicization makes it difficult to fund and share research or discuss renewable issues frankly. How deep do you bury cables to prevent exposures, which has occurred in the US and abroad? No data. What are the impacts from cables' heat or electromagnetic fields? No data. The National Academy of Sciences and Engineering and Medicine corroborated fishermen's long-standing radar interference concerns, but we still don't know the full magnitude of this effect or the safety and national security concerns, as even larger turbines are slated for future use. And there has been no discussion whatsoever of what project decommissioning will look like. Recently, we became aware that Vineyard Wind 1 was given permission to avoid paying the decommissioning financial assurance up front. Instead, they got what I like to call a wimpy waiver from BOEM. They will kindly pay for the decommissioning bond in 15 years for a project to be finished this year. What could possibly go wrong? Without pre-construction baseline information, many ecological implications remain unknown. Fish management surveys must follow rigorous scientific methods, yet short-term surveys of lease areas by wind developers have no mandatory oversight by independent experts. They will not provide the essential information that we need. But what we do know isn't good. We do know offshore wind we do know offshore wind warms the sea surface. It affects ocean circulation patterns. It produces substantial wake effects and impacts upwelling and downwelling, which feeds the ocean. In the mid-Atlantic, an unmixed water column called the cold pool underpins much of the region's productivity. Fixed turbines could jeopardize this unique ecological feature. Fishing is our nation's oldest industry, preceding our republic. Rushing headlong into the wind risks it all. Without the science and mitigation we need first, we risk potentially catastrophic mistakes, not only in the first few projects, but also in all future projects. America's fishing communities, our wild-caught seafood supply, and our ocean all deserve better. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much. Now we'll have the opening statement by Pat Schroeder, a community advocate.
Thank you for holding this hearing today, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. My name is Pat Schroeder. I'm the district representative for State Senator Mary Beth Carrozza. My responsibilities include constituent services. And in light of that, I am in daily contact with those in our district, including, of course, Ocean City. Prior to serving with Senator Carrozza, my late husband and I ran a marine electronics business. Our customers were both from the commercial and the recreational field, and they still contact me today when they have issues on the water. I am also a lifetime member of the Ocean City Marlin Club, and for several years I served as chairman of the Worcester County Shoreline Commission, dealing with construction in both state and federal waters. When the proposal for offshore wind project here was first announced, Senator Carrozza was open to the concept, but skeptical, as we had already read about some problems with existing projects. We had questions and asked that a more detailed investigation be done on potential impacts of offshore wind, as offshore wind presents some unique situations. When BOEM finally issued its environmental impact study, I found the lengthy report confirmed most of Senator Carrozza's previously expressed concerns, as well as those and others expressed to me by locals. Our primary focus, amplified by our local commercial watermen, was the negative impact on commercial fishing. Aside from tourism, fishing is one of the main economic drivers in Ocean City. Fishing contributes not only to the economy of the county, but to the state and federal government as well. Our commercial fleet provides a steady food source for local restaurants and more. When COVID hit and there were shortages of supplies and groceries, the first people to contact me were our commercial watermen telling me, we can still catch fish, we can feed our local community. Our commercial fleet aside, we also are hearing from calls in our office that the BOEM report stated in their unavoidable adverse impact section that even with remedial actions, substantial negative impact on commercial and recreational fishing can be expected indefinitely. Our recreational boaters stand to be impacted as well, and one single tournament generates over $16 million. That's tax money for the local and the state. We hear from all sectors of the population. Locals express huge doubts about the promised jobs from wind, believing those projections to be overstated for smaller projects like this. Many jobs are only during construction. We don't actually have a job shortage in Ocean City. We have a workforce shortage. The skill set needed for the construction of these projects is not what our local workforce currently provides. The positive comments regarding jobs made at the BOEM hearing in Ocean City were made by steel workers and others who don't live anywhere here on the shore. Okay. Residents are concerned with protecting our environment and our wildlife on land, sea, and air. They were saddened when dead whales and dolphins started washing up on beaches. We had not experienced this before, and the only difference seemed to be the high-impact activity a little north of here. Locals worry about birds that fly into turbine blades and marine life that is threatened. We have a horseshoe crab harvest here, critical for the safety of injectable medications, yet there were plans to put turbines right in horseshoe sanctuary areas. Finally, our residents are fearful of the effect of hurricane-force winds on wind turbines. Ocean City is subject to strong northeasters and hurricanes. Even the EIS report states that a hurricane could result in the loss of a blade and/or turbine collapse. We worry about a football field-sized blade hurling through the air. The people I hear from tell me they choose to live in Worcester County for their quality of life. Locals and visitors are drawn to the ocean and the beach. The industrialization of our ocean is in direct conflict with what brings people here to live, work, and/or retire. Offshore wind threatens to change all of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our last panelist, Travis Fisher from the Cato Institute.
Thank you for the opportunity to discuss issues near and dear to my heart, the economics of the power grid and the impacts of a forced transition to politically favored means of generating electricity. I join you today not just as an expert witness, but also as a resident of the state of Maryland. My wife and I are raising a family and paying a power bill in Silver Spring. And it's disappointing when I see Maryland pursue unwise energy policies that impose a high price on my family and every other family in the state with no comparable benefit. I'd like to focus today on the Maryland law that mandates the build out of 8.5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2031, called the Power Act. I estimate that it will cost each household in Maryland more than $25,000 to build that much offshore wind. The cost would be spread over the life of the offtake agreements, approximately 20 years. However you slice it, the upfront cost of building 8.5 gigawatts of offshore wind is about $63 billion, with a B, billion. That's just the capital cost of 8.5 gigawatts of offshore wind in this region, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. There are also ongoing operation and maintenance costs that would add approximately another $1 billion per year. All told, the Maryland offshore wind mandate will have direct costs of more than $80 billion. Now, it's true that all power plants are big investments. However, the thing that makes intermittent energy, like wind energy, so costly for the power grid, in addition to its high direct cost, is the fact that it can't really replace a power plant that operators can turn off and on. The wind doesn't always blow at the right speed, but people always demand electricity, especially when it's this cold outside. In other words, the people of Maryland will end up paying for the wind and a backup source, like a gas-fired power plant. It's been instructive to watch the green energy policies of Germany and California play out in this regard. Both places have chosen to embrace intermittent energy at the expense of reliable energy, and the experiment went about as poorly as we expected. We know, for example, that Germany's energy transition has caused its residents to pay 3 times more for electricity than we pay in the United States. California pays higher electricity prices than any other state in the lower 48. In short, intermittent resources raise the cost of the electricity system. We should keep in mind that increases in electricity costs are very regressive. That is, they hit low-income folks the hardest. The energy burden, meaning the percentage of income spent on energy, is already significantly higher for low-income households than for others, 8.1% versus 2.3%. High-cost offshore wind might be a nice concept for politicians and for the wealthy, but the cost of offshore wind is scary for everyday people. Grid problems are made worse when low-cost existing power plants are closed before the end of their useful life. California and Germany are both guilty of that when they closed nuclear plants ahead of schedule. New York also closed the Indian Point plant ahead of schedule. Maryland is dealing with similar issues with the Brandon Shores coal plant. I hope those can be resolved. Well, we no longer have to speculate on the cost of offshore wind in the United States. We can look to other states on the East Coast, with apologies to New Jersey. In the second half of last year, BP and Equinor canceled their contract with the state of New York. Ørsted canceled 2 large projects in New Jersey. Developers in Massachusetts canceled 4 projects totaling 2.4 gigawatts of offshore wind. It may be too late to save California or New York from themselves, but it's not too late to recognize the folly of the forced energy transition and to stop energy prices from skyrocketing in Maryland. So, what are some alternatives? First, for anyone who wants to see a green transition, renewables will still be built if the offshore wind mandate is repealed. Solar energy and onshore wind will continue to grow in a market setting, partly because of their much lower capital cost than offshore wind, but also because there are corporate buyers who have voluntary goals to procure renewables. Let's not forget that there are also lucrative subsidies at the federal level to help these technologies. Second, for those of us who simply want electricity to be reliable and affordable, let's see what gets built without the mandate. No one has tried to build an offshore wind project in the United States without a state-level mandate. The only way to know what type of power plant makes the most sense is to put it to the market test. And there is a market. There is a market. Maryland is the original M in the PJM interconnection. The P and the J stand for Pennsylvania and Jersey. PJM is the multi-state wholesale electricity market covering 13 states and DC. PJM has a capacity market that is designed to make sure the most cost-effective resources get built. Many states within PJM are going outside the market to procure resources that the market would never take. This is a costly policy that undermines the original basis of electricity markets, which was to ensure reliable electricity at the lowest cost. Finally, I want to preempt a question I hear frequently, which is that offshore wind mandates make sense given the presence of climate externalities. Some say the social cost of greenhouse gases is so high that it justifies a mandate. My colleagues at Cato showed with respect to nuclear energy that the social cost of CO2 would have to be unrealistically high to justify building even new nuclear facilities on CO2 grounds, as opposed to, say, gas-fired plants. The same is true. In fact, the case is much stronger when it comes to offshore wind. There is simply no economic justification for an offshore wind mandate. Thank you for holding this important hearing. I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you very much. And let me yield to my colleague, Mr. Smith, for questions of the panelists.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me just, I have a number of questions, but your testimonies were extraordinary. Comprehensive, enlightening, incisive, and hopefully actionable, if only the bureaucrats and the groupthink that we see coming out of the scientists who are so fearful of expressing a dissident voice would just listen to you. We're listening, we're learning, I'm learning. You guys probably knew it already, but I'm learning every time I hear the experts you speak. So thank you for that. Let me just say, you know, one of the things that I think is underappreciated as to why in the public and hopefully the investigative press will start asking even harder questions of the administration, both your state government and mine and others, but especially the federal government. Why the hurry-up offense? Well, one of the reasons is that as part of the Inflation Control Act, which we all voted against, there was language included that said that the taxpayer will bear 30% of all the construction costs if construction begins on or before January 1st, 2026. So any dissident voice, any information that does not comport with the narrative, and it's a false narrative at that, gets dismissed, thrown aside, nothing to see here. We're doing disinformation when we have hearings like this. That's what one of the top leaders in New Jersey had said, disinformation. We're asking hard questions, and again, Dr. Harris has been doing that for a decade. Has asked those hard questions. We're doing it in New Jersey, my good friend Dr. Van Drew and I, and we get crickets. We do not get information. And that goes for the mayors, the assemblymen, state senators, and all the other elected officials. So, you know, I think that's one of the reasons why we see everyone just putting blinders on in the federal government and going full speed ahead to get this done. You might want to speak about that. And let me just say, again, to Megan Lapp, you know, again, National Academy of Sciences report and all the other reports that clearly show that radar will be malaffected I have two brothers who are former military pilots. One flew A-7s off the Enterprise, and the other flew helicopters, Cobras and Apaches. And I've had long conversations with them and so many others about the disruptiveness of those windmills as they're turning in terms of what it does to radar and the inability to see what might be right in front of them, and especially for the Coast Guard. So maybe, Megan, you could talk a little bit further about how the Coast Guard needs to stand up. I asked Director Klein at a hearing of the National Resources Committee on April 26th all about the radars. Asked her about survivability with bad weather as well, and gotten crickets on that one too. I mean, I have the transcript. It was unbelievable. Don't you know? Haven't you looked at this with the kind of inspection that it requires? But I asked her about, the fact that there's no mitigation efforts being done, and we're going to be blind. We are going to be blind. Our military is not going to see. Taiwan right now has real concerns because obviously Xi Jinping in China, has hit them in the crosshairs. And they're very upset that they may not even see certain things happening where they have this deployed wind farms in their country. Finland, Sweden, there was just a big article in how wind turbines are blinding the RAF's virtual vital North Sea radars. And it goes on, it's in the London Telegraph, and it says Britain's race to net zero risked blinding crucial radars protecting the UK from incursions over the North Sea amid fears that Russia will launch a campaign of sabotage. And it goes on and on about how they may not see something that Putin is doing. Taiwan may not see, and Japan's in that same category, may not see what Xi Jinping is doing. We may not see what all of them are doing because we're blinding ourselves. If you could speak to that, because it's just shocking. And when I asked this of Director Klein, she said, I think our engagement with the DOD, we work very closely with the Coast Guard and NASA. And it's like, well, what do they say? She dismissed it all and said, there's a clearinghouse that DOD set up. And you might want to speak to that, which was really a way of pushing back from those commanders of various military installations throughout our country about land-based, not water-based necessarily, or ocean, but land-based windmills, where they were saying it disrupts our radar, whether it be B-2s or the others. They were very concerned about accidents and other things, and that's on land. So here we have a situation, again, Mr. Chairman, this RAF article just is another bit of additional information, and then the groupthink that we're having from all these scientists. Nobody's dare say anything in our government. And this is why hard questions from the investigative reporters. We ask the hard questions in Congress. Dr. Harris asked the hard questions as a cardinal, as we call him, and one of the leaders of the Appropriations Committee, and they don't get answers. We don't get answers. And they're just going to keep barreling through and with this false narrative. So, Megan, if you might want to speak to that.
Sure. So first off, the Coast Guard, and I want to just say, on the record, I am not trying to disparage the Coast Guard. We love the Coast Guard. They rescue us when we're in trouble, and that's why this is really, really concerning for us. I've spoken to multiple, boots on the ground coasties, people who are in charge of local stations, people on boats. All of them are extremely concerned. I've had them tell me, our vessels are going to experience the same radar interference as yours. We have the same radar. It's going to be a problem. I've had them tell me we're not going to be able to conduct helicopter search and rescue in a wind farm. But they all tell me we are not allowed to say that. That if Congress or someone else asks us about these issues, we have to say, well, we will do the best that we can considering the circumstance. And realistically, the Coast Guard is a branch of the U.S. military, and so they're not allowed to contradict the orders of a superior officer. So obviously these, directives are coming from the top. There is, people are being told not to say certain things, but it is very concerning because there has not been any real analysis, quantifiable, that says, hey, we're not going to be able to do these things in there. We're going to have X% of our search and rescue capabilities reduced, to really look at the issue and have an honest conversation, and nobody has done that. In, I believe it was 2014, there is a federal interagency wind turbine radar interference working group. It is comprised of the FAA, the DOD, the DOE, NOAA, all these big name agencies, and they committed to fix the offshore wind radar interference problem by 2025. In 10 years, they have not come up with any solutions. They have essentially done nothing, and they just re-upped their MOU. And it's because there is no solution right now. And as you were mentioning, you know, experiences elsewhere in the UK, they thought that they had a solution at one point in like 2012, 2014 or something. So they said, okay, if you're going to put in, and this is for military radar, the ones that you were mentioning, air surveillance radar, they said, okay, if you put in a wind turbine or a wind farm in the line of sight of this radar, you have to put up this new super duper wind turbine radar that's still going to work. So they went ahead and they permitted a wind farm. They put in all the turbines right in the line of sight of this particular radar. And after it was built, the UK Ministry of Defense came out and said, oh no, it didn't work, we can't see. That's a huge problem that we don't want to end up with here. Starting in 2019, the UK Ministry of Defense actually, they started putting out prize money for anybody who could solve the problem. And we still have not solved the problem. Nobody has solved the problem. But yet here we go, you know, doing this on our East Coast. We have a real nice thing called the Atlantic Ocean that keeps us separated from a lot of bad guys. And, you know, we're going to create a wall of radar interference on right in front of it. And I know that, you know, Congressman Harris has written letters asking the DOD, the Undersecretary of Defense came out and said, yeah, it's going to interfere with our air surveillance radars. But yet everything keeps moving. So obviously there are a lot of concerns. Nothing is being done about it realistically. And to your point about the wind sighting clearinghouse and the DOD, that was created during the Obama administration. And during that time on land, there was an expansion of onshore offshore wind, and it was being put near a lot of military installations. And the military commanders would say, no, I don't want this near my installation, and kill it. But then in the name of green energy, what happened was the DOD took that ability of local-based commanders to say no away from them and put it in a DOD wind sighting clearinghouse. And the guy who was the original executive director of that clearinghouse, as soon as he retired, went on to become a representative for an onshore wind company. So there's been a lot of issues. None of them have been addressed. And now we're talking about, you know, both maritime safety and national security.
What a conflict of interest, and another example of the revolving door. And we have raised issues with that clearinghouse and its lack of transparency. It's so opaque, it's ridiculous. And to me, it's just, everything's okay, no problem, nothing to see here. And yet the evidence is overwhelming that we will be blinded. And again, we live in a world, we all know this. You know, look what's happening in the Middle East, look what's happening in Ukraine, look what's happening with Xi Jinping in China. I mean, the world is awash with threat, and we're blinding ourselves to potential adversaries, real adversaries. Some of them aren't even potential. And we're a little late on, so hopefully this, did you want to comment on that? Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to offer one comment in addition to what Megan said. Not only is the Coast Guard from an issue of radar, but the high-frequency CODAR radar that is used for the ocean observatory systems, they basically determine the current height, and it's used for tsunami alerts, that type of thing, in addition for all of the ocean observatory systems across all three coasts. But on top of that, in the WTRIM webinar series that Megan spoke about, they did one specific thing in where the Coast Guard was involved, and involving the search and rescue opportunities for the Coast Guard. Specifically, the CODAR radar, which like all these others are line of sight, you can't get through. The woman on the webinar on YouTube, I'll send everyone the link, they can watch it, spoke that a 1-foot error in current height is equal to a 24-kilometer error in the hot zone in which they search for someone when they fall off a ship. And also with the height of those turbines now, which are even taller than the Chrysler building at 1,065 feet, normally search and rescue goes in at 500 feet, so you have a chance at seeing a little orange blip or a little thing. At twice that height, it won't be happening.
Yes.
Oh, if I could add to that, I just wanted to say that the issue of radar was first discovered in 2008 with the Travis Air Force Base, as you may know. In 2008, it was the Long Range Radar Joint Program. They did a presentation and said, at that time, 39% of our DOD and DHS radars had already been compromised by wind energy onshore. That was a time when we had about 20,000 megawatts of operating wind, maybe 10,000 turbines. Today, we have 146,000 megawatts of wind. And the conflicts have been enormous. They're in New York, they're in Nevada, they're in Texas. They're everywhere that we have military installations right now. And I wanted to point out one in particular, because you may not have seen this, but we, in addition to military radar and also navigational, this for air navigation radar, the Rother system, we have 3 of them, one in Virginia, one in Puerto Rico, and one in Texas, and they triangulate. The purpose predominantly in the military, for the country, is to interdict drug activity, okay? The Rother site in Virginia has a memorandum of operation with an Iberdrola project in North Carolina. And if you have an opportunity, if you haven't read that agreement, please do. It effectively, it does nothing to protect the Rother facility, and it is directly compromised by that project. And yet, because of the way the clearinghouse is set up and because of the law that governs decisions around onshore wind or any wind, and the military's, basically the military's arms are tied, hands are tied in terms of trying to stop these projects from impacting what I would say is the world's most sophisticated radar system ever. And we are sacrificing that for energy, green energy.
Thank you. And the superficial answers we do get from some Director Klein, remember, she's head of BOEM, point person, and I asked her very directly about all of the radar issues, and I quoted her, and I say it again, turbine generator mitigation techniques have not been substantially investigated, implemented, matured, or deployed. That's from the National Academy of Sciences 1 year ago. And they're just proceeding full speed ahead, and as you all have added so much to it, we are blinding ourselves.
And this is one of the questions that we would have. Let's take the Rother, for example, okay? Has anyone gone back and seen what kind of impacts? Because also the situation is in Travis. Travis Air Force, they never fixed the problem. They realigned the radar. And if you look at they have a mid-air collision pamphlet that is put out annually, and it's put out by Travis, because Travis is responsible also for overseeing commercial aircraft. That's because of where it's located. And it literally says, if you are flying in this vicinity, the vicinity would be over where there's like 1 billion wind turbines. There weren't initially, but now there are. It says, if you're flying in this area, you need to be turning on your transponder because we can't see you. And if it's saying that, that means just think about all the bad actors who know that's happening. And I'll give you one other example, which is infuriating. There's a radar facility in Oregon. It's called the Fossil Facility. Okay, that radar facility, the military tried to stop that one, and tried to stop a large wind project that was proposed to be built near there. That radar facility is predominantly its job in life is to look for incoming anywhere from Northern California up into the Canadian area. We're talking about China, we're talking about Russia, and that radar facility, at the time when we were fighting that wind project, they presumably had technical mitigations, which is the requirement under the clearinghouse. And they said, when I remember talking with a staffer for, it wasn't Senator Cornyn, but one of the staffers, and I said, what happens if those mitigations don't work? And the response back I got, this was in 2012, was, well, they have to. That's it. I have no idea what's going on with that facility now. We won't know. You could perhaps find out if it's working, but I mean, there's serious compromises that have been done all over the country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Smith. Dr. Van Drew.
Thank you. And by the way, I just want to thank too, and I know some of you know him, the Chairman of Natural Resources, Bruce Westerman. He was very helpful in getting the GAO study that we did get, that we fought for. You know, it took a little bit of work. It'll probably be ready in 9 months to a year, but they are really digging in. So if there are any other questions we want them to dig into, if you forward them, I would be glad to make sure my point people are working with them hand in glove on this, okay? Secondly, I want to thank all of you. I don't know that you woke up one morning and said, boy, I want to go against really powerful forces and travel around the country and tell the truth, even though it's going to be real hard and I'm going to have to go up against a lot. So I appreciate you, I really do, and some of you have gotten to know personally through the years. We should hear from them. So I like to say I'm a simple guy, I'm a simple country dentist. Some people don't believe me, but I think I am. But in any event, I'm going to ask you some simple and relatively quick questions. I'm going to start with Megan. Megan, and we have known each other a long time. Is there any doubt in your mind that we will produce less seafood and we will lose jobs in the United States of America if we go through with all of these projects?
No, absolutely none.
No doubt at all.
No doubt at all. Commercial fishing, particularly mobile gear fishing, it cannot coexist with offshore wind in the same place at the same time, and these projects are sited on our fishing grounds, so absolutely, we will see a
Which
decrease.
means, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to rely on other countries even for our food, so you understand that. Mr. Rand, you and I talked for hours over the phone, and what really struck me, and again, for people that are familiar, the sounds of whales are a beautiful thing to behold. If you listen to recordings or you've watched any documentaries on television, and you described to me, because you were in Hawaii, and you also performed acoustic tests there, and you've performed acoustic tests here, while this activity was going on by these wind companies. Describe the difference.
The sound of the whales off of Hawaii, innumerable. So my wife and I went out in a little kayak about 2/3 of a mile off the west side of Maui. I had my hydrophone, which is an underwater microphone, dropped it in the water. I had my headphones on, had a dry bag, and my jaw dropped open, and Terry's looking at me, and so I took the earphones and went like this, and she started weeping. There were thousands of whales talking to each other, could not count. The sound was amazing. I think I should put that sound on my website so people can hear it.
Me too.
It's astonishing. Thank you. That is a healthy population. Thousands of whales migrating Hawaii up to Alaska and back down every year. In Cape Cod, I was fortunate, very fortunate, to get within about a mile of a pod of 12. We were able to count them by sight because we have sea stage 0 conditions, which I chose. A nice, quiet day, water like glass. And there were about 12 right whales in a group, and the difference was stunning. Just occasional sound, and then another occasional call. I got one call set where one is talking to another, and I think it was a parent and a child, because the pitch is very different, but the child mimics the parent's sound, and I'll see if I can get that on the website as well. Very sparse, minimal, almost no conversation at all. A huge contrast between these two populations, and it really underscores how endangered that population is. And of course, the fin whales are endangered as well. This is not an environment to bring in more industrial noise. Those waters are already noise burdened. So thank you for the question.
You're welcome. And one other quick question with that. The sounds that you did record, the noise that you did record, the acoustics you did record, were beyond allowable limits set by regulation. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
The sound, what you did record, I'm sorry, I'll be more specific, off the coast of the United States, here, not in Hawaii, were beyond the legal limit that should be allowable. Is that correct?
The sonar levels were above those that were permitted. And we discovered that when we looked at the permits, that they had used what I call a proxy level. They picked a value for their model that was way below the actual levels from the manufacturer's data. That value is in a document which uses a reference by NOAA and NIMS. The document that this uses as a reference is very good. It's high class, very, very good data. But they picked the lowest number they could find. And what we measured was 16 decibels higher. Now, for reference, 16 decibels means the distances that are needed for their setbacks is tremendously larger than the distances that they were permitted for.
Thank you. And in my mind, you can't say this, but that noise was deafening to the whales. And NOAA embalmed once again, because it's a different project. You know, rules for thee, but not for me. Rules for commercial fishermen, but not for everybody else. Rules for people that do their work out in the ocean, or rules for tourism, but not for everybody else. But damn it, it's not rules for the wind industry. Thank you for your work. Lisa, is there any doubt in your mind that the increased mortality of whales are due to wind turbine activity?
No. And if I could just add to that, between 2015 and 2016, the increase in whale deaths, which prompted NOAA to declare the unusual mortality on the humpback whale, the minke whale, and the North Atlantic right whale, there's nothing that I could imagine would cause such an acute change in mortality. And when you look at the numbers preceding 2016 and then after, it had to have been something significant. It had to have been something that just took them by surprise, the whales. And the only thing that really changed in their environment, as you correctly noted, it wasn't the commercial shipping or any of the boat activity. We looked at that before and after, and it did not change. But what changed was they added the offshore wind activity. So I am convinced, but I could only say there's a strong correlation.
I understand. Lisa, would you say, in your mind, from all the work that you've done, I consider you an expert, that what you've seen and heard and read, that we are risking to some degree our national security because of this wind turbine activity?
Yes, it is. We are in a very scary situation, and if I might add, there is a new project that's proposed right next to the Naval Air Station in Kingsville. That project, that facility is already surrounded by wind turbines, and it's been a fight for years to try and keep that facility from being compromised. Half of our military pilots, our Navy pilots, are trained at Kingsville there and also at Corpus Christi. If we lose that facility, I'm reminded by its mission is so compromised that it cannot continue to train our military pilots. My military colleagues tell me that we are not able to create new bases. The United States has already demonstrated, at least the population, that it has no patience for building more military assets. We can't, and that's what we'll lose. If we lose one of them, we lose a very significant one.
So what we've heard today so far is we are risking national security, and we're going to rely on other countries for our food supply. I thank you.
Yes. Thank you for the
Pat, I'm sorry, Bonnie, is there any doubt in your mind that we're going to, again, I want to hear it again, we're going to hurt commercial fishing and the fishing industry? And any doubt in your mind, if that happens, we are going to rely upon other nations and have to beg them for our food?
Zero doubt. When you look at the mobile gear that are used and the trawl gear, the dredge gear for clams and scallops, those areas are so vital that they are basically putting all of the offshore wind turbines in our offshore grounds where the fish are. So no doubt whatsoever.
Thank you.
Could I just offer
You
one
sure
thing to
can.
jump onto
Sure.
Lisa? In 2017, in April, NOAA did a presser announcing the unusual mortality event of the humpback whales, and they predated it to 2016. There were also 3 projects for offshore wind in 2015 that were done. There were 2 done, gosh, I can't remember the name of the company, but the other one was for Bay State Wind, which was Ørsted. And at that time, they did the surveys and they didn't require an IHA, because when I talked to the NOAA, I cold called them and asked, They explained that an IHA is purely a service. It is not required, but if you happen to light up a whale in the process, then the project can stop. So in 2015 and 16, they really weren't doing that as of yet. But in 2017, when they did the presser, it was announcing the unusual mortality event for whales, going back for humpbacks to 2016. A reporter asked specifically at the presser how many humpback whales there were hit by ships prior to the UME. And the woman on the line, and I can send that to you so you can listen to it, there were from Maine to Virginia, which was considered the range, annually 1.4 humpbacks per year for the entire range. That's just 1.4 a year, everything. The first year of the UME, there were 10 ship strikes, which coincided with all of the survey work.
That tells the story right there. And I'll tell, some folks don't know this, but we looked into this as well. In New Jersey off the coast, they had a pathologist because they were just washing ashore like every other day. It got really bad. And we never saw anything like this before. And we checked into the pathologist, said it was inconclusive. We also found out that the pathologist was on the payroll of Orsted. Surprise, surprise. Remember we said in the beginning, it's about money. Pat, first of all, I want to thank you for your service to the state senator who does great work. We appreciate you and we appreciate her. Your constituents, because the work that you do are with real people. You're not just sitting in Congress, but you're on the ground level. Do you feel a groundswell of support for these things? Do you think your constituents, the people who are going to pay for it, do they want this?
No, just the opposite. Initially, we didn't hear a lot in our office, not much commentary, because it was new and people really didn't know what to expect. But as time went on and people learned more, they were opposed to it, vehemently opposed to it. And they had objections that the hearings that were taking place, not this one, but the prior hearings, that they were offered to make comment. And yes, they did that. They sent in their written testimony or oral testimony. But a lot of their testimony was a question, and nobody ever answered the question. So they were very frustrated by the whole process. And I have heard from the Ocean City Marlin Club, 800 members totally opposed. Atlantic Coast Sports Fishing Club Association, 200 members opposed. Hotel Motel Restaurant Association opposed. County commissioners opposed. So in my travels within the district, everything that I'm hearing is from people who oppose. And strangely enough, not even one call has come into our office saying, please tell Senator Carrozza to support offshore wind.
And that tells the story. And by the way, we all got to pay for it, though. That's the bottom line. Travis, I know I've been taking a little bit of time here, and I will be done after this. I'm going to ask you, I just want to make sure we understand, do you believe from all the evidence you've looked at, everything you've seen studying this around the world, that our utility rates of everybody, not just people who live, immediately at the coast, but of everybody will go up and will go up substantially, yes or no?
Yes, I do, and I'd like to add to that too, because there's a lot of nuance to this that I think the folks behind this, the wind industry advocates, are very good at hiding the costs of their projects. So on the one hand, yes, it will increase utility rates. That's easy to say. Yes, it will. On the other hand, there is a tax subsidy. The Inflation Reduction Act, which is a terrible name for that law, but the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies at the federal level also contribute to the cost of this. So we pay for it not just in our utility bills, we pay for it in our tax bills, and we pay for the grid integration costs in an indirect way. So yes, it will impact utility rates, but we shouldn't stop there. It's a much bigger impact.
Travis, I'll tell you how bad it is. In the state of New Jersey, you can look this up, you'd be interested in it. They get all the things that you spoke about. But beside that, because the utility rates were going to go up so much in New Jersey, the state legislature decided, well, we're going to make sure that some subsidies that they get would actually go back to the ratepayer. Won't make up the difference by any means, but we'll give it back to the ratepayer because they're hurting. They just voted last year, it's so expensive and it's costing them so much that they took away the help for the ratepayer and even gave it that to the foreign country, just so you know. And last question, is there any doubt in your mind that if we do all of this, in some ways, talking about the supply chain with food, talking about national security, that we're going to diminish our national security in the United States of America?
No, I think that's pretty clear too. And in fact, an entity that doesn't get mentioned a lot, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which is our grid reliability watchdog, they have for the first time in 2023 identified energy policy as a threat to the reliability of the grid. Now, it's not a leap to say that we need a reliable grid to have national security. So to the extent that we're hurting our grid reliability and our security with energy policy, that's got to be the easiest fix. Let's stop doing this stuff.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Megan, let me just ask about hurricanes and these offshore windmills. Is there anywhere in the world where these windmills have been put up where the possibility of, Category 3, 111-mile-an-hour winds, is there anywhere where they're installed in the world that is subjected to this kind of environment now?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, so we're just going to do a little beta testing off our coast, I guess, for this, which is just incredible. Mr. Rand, I have a question for you. A couple of questions, because I'm fascinated by the lack of attention to underwater sound associated with these. Part of what you said today was that or it was in your written testimony, the mitigation that's suggested probably isn't going to be effective enough. Is that right? Because they say, well, they're going to be driving these piles now of these bubbler systems which supposedly mitigate the sound. Your impression is that's not going to be adequate.
Well, the levels I measured, they're consistent with seismic air guns. I would hope that if you put mitigation in on pile driving, it's going to be well below that. Right. But I was not impressed when I saw the data. It's very loud.
And the interesting thing, and I would like you to confirm whether it's true or not. So the windmills, as the blades turn, they do produce sound waves underwater, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yeah, there are two pathways. One is down through the tower, and the other's airborne that comes down, and it goes through a kind of a refraction process and comes into the water.
Oh, so there are actually two different ways. And scientifically, the smaller windmills that were first proposed, for instance, off the Maryland coast, might in fact produce a very different underwater sound signature from that than the very large windmills that are now being proposed. Is that right? I mean, there'd be reason to believe they're not the same underwater signature. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's sort of a difference between light bulbs. If you have a 25-watt light bulb and you have a 100-watt light bulb, the 100-watt light bulb, you turn it on, it's going to produce more light. There's more energy coming out of it. It's the same, the same thing with noise, sound, power. The smaller turbines have smaller sound power. Larger turbines have a greater sound power. So there's more energy being emitted.
And my understanding is that the largest windmills now produce, I think it's the 900, I guess it's around 950 feet. Is it higher, 970, somewhere more?
1,065 feet.
My understanding is that the prototype of that windmill was built on land. Is that right? I mean, it was a Danish company, I believe. It's Versa is the largest one. So it hasn't even been tested in water.
Correct.
In terms of its signature. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're going to beta test them for the effect from hurricanes. We're going to beta test them for the effect on underwater sound. And the most troubling thing to me is that it's these underwater sound waves. I've been told, and I'm going to ask you, Mr. Rand, whether this might be true. This is what bothers the Department of Defense a little bit, is because underwater sound waves in those frequencies can be generated by a windmill or by a Russian submarine.
It's a legitimate concern. It's in acoustics, we call it masking. So if you have one sound that's loud enough, you can't hear a sound you might be interested in listening to.
So,
yeah.
and again, if you look at the geography, one would imagine that the target for a enemy action coming from a submarine might most likely come from off the Atlantic coast, right, aimed at Washington, D.C., which is, of course, where, and we don't have to second-guess this, on 9/11, that was one of the targets. Washington, D.C. is going to be a target. That, in fact, we should probably know what the effect of these windmills on our ability to detect underwater threats, probably before we build them. Would you think that's a reasonable thing to do?
Yes.
I thought so. I don't know. So it's just puzzling to me. Anyway, Lisa, as far as I know, and I think we discussed this briefly before we came out, there is no law that prohibits the Chinese from buying this wind farm from U.S. Wind, right? There's nothing that prohibits it outright. Is that right?
That's correct.
So U.S. Wind can collect all the subsidies, they can sign all the contracts, they can collect the billions of dollars from the ratepayers and the taxpayers, and then basically sell it to a Chinese company. It was not illegal to sell it to a Chinese company.
That is
per
correct.
se. That's what I thought. And in a push to make so much of your energy dependent on offshore wind, which might be sold to a foreign entity, I'm not sure is a good security strategy. Bonnie.
Excuse me, Representative, I just wanted to say
Yeah.
that there is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Its purpose in life is to evaluate any investment by foreign countries that might impact our national security.
Sure.
So that might raise a red flag. All they can do is advise to the President, and the President can say yes or no. So
That's right, and this actually, apropos to the first congressional district, we passed legislation on the appropriations bill this year, for instance, that outlaws the ability of the Chinese government to buy up farmland in the United States. So, absent but absent a law that specifically denies it, the current setup with regards to the sale of this would be that it could be permitted. Bonnie, in your testimony you mentioned we're not sure about the electromagnetic fields that come in from the transmission cables.
Right.
Now my understanding is that the horseshoe crab industry is centered in the mid-Atlantic here.
Right.
As a physician, I'll tell you, and a lot of people don't know, when you get an intravenous medication of any kind, something that comes out of a sterile intravenous vial, that batch has been tested against a derivative of horseshoe crabs to make sure it doesn't have endotoxin, something that would kill you, okay, a bacterial endotoxin in it. So horseshoe crab industry is pretty important. I mean, we really have no economically feasible way to avoid having to test those medications that way.
Right.
And the horseshoe crab migrates from offshore, and if you've gone to the Delaware beaches, some of the beaches, you know they migrate onshore, lay their eggs, and then they go back.
Right.
And the concern was that if you lay these cables, we don't know if these horseshoe crabs are going to cross them because of electromagnetic fields.
Right.
A large number of the animal kingdom actually don't like electromagnetic fields.
Right.
And when we asked, I think we made an inquiry to Boeing, and they said, well, we did a little experiment in a lab somewhere, and it didn't seem to bother them. So is this another instance where we're just going to beta test the effect on horseshoe crabs after we lay the lay the cable and hope that the electromagnetic field doesn't interfere?
There's a couple of issues with EMF, with the cables themselves. First of all, you have the electromagnetic frequency, which for the Earth itself, it's at about 55 milligauss. So if you're looking on a map, that's how they believe a lot of animals, a lot of fish they use for migration. And if you look at Long Island, I don't know, as opposed to Maryland, it's basically in a north-south progression. And what I learned by being involved in Article 7s with transmission cables up in New York is that depending on the angle that it comes in on, it can actually add to the milligauss or subtract from. So if you're going in the wrong direction, that might be a really bad thing. Additionally, they create heat. And as horseshoe crabs in the winter, I think they might burrow. So the whole idea that you have a corridor that's up to 1,000 feet wide while they jet plow, which is basically, or jet trench the ocean floor down to 12 feet, and or use the Osbit PLP 240, which is an underwater bulldozer, that might be a bad day too.
No, thank you. And again, these are things that we should know before we drive the first piling. Travis, let me ask you because I frequently people sometimes confuse the economics of offshore and onshore wind. And my understanding, and ratepayers on the Eastern Shore, for instance, most of the standard service is about, for the generation itself, about 8 cents a kilowatt hour now. If you check your electric bills, that's what it's going up to in January. And then, of course, you have transmission costs as well. But my understanding is that in the United States right now, onshore wind, maybe with its subsidies, and you might correct me if not, is competitive in that area of generating electricity in about that, 6 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. But offshore wind is multiples more than that. Not like 50% more, but I mean multiples more than that. So when we start generating electricity, and again, Travis, what's your estimate for what the cost per kilowatt hour is to generate offshore?
Ballpark 16 cents.
16 cents. So if we go as we go toward more and more offshore, what we're basically saying is we're going to go to a source that is roughly double the cost of of our average cost now. Is that right? I mean, it's 16 cents versus 8 cents.
Well, I want to be clear here, too, that the existing grid, existing resources that we have, coal-fired power plants, nuclear, gas, they can generate, they're already built, they can generate at a marginal cost of something like 3 cents. So that's really the thing to compare.
That's right. I'm sorry. What I didn't say is that 8 cents, of course, includes all the other associated costs with generation. But you're right. I mean, natural gas and coal, probably 3 and 4 cents kilowatt hour. So you're literally looking at multiples. Why would we do that when we are in economic competition with China, for instance? My understanding, you can correct me, is that China actually, its largest new generation facilities are coal-fired.
That's right.
Generating at roughly 3 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour?
That's right, and China has about as many coal plants in progress being built right now as we have operating in the U.S.
In total. That's right. So just from a national security point of view, an economic, does this make any sense at all to spend this much money, this much effort on a technology that's expensive where we don't know all the answers?
Absolutely not, but if I could add a little detail, because the answer is just a flat no, but the detail that I'd like to add is one of the only ways that we're competitive against China, it's not labor costs, it's not, materials costs. They beat us on a lot of those fronts. We have one of the most reliable and low-cost power grids in the world. What policies like this risk doing is sacrificing that. It's our best asset, and these policies directly undermine our best asset.
No, thank you. And just one final reflection is that dependability of the grid. I think we saw with what happened in Texas a couple of years ago that dependence on wind or other non-base load delivery is probably not a good idea going forward. Would that be an understatement?
I think that's an understatement. That's definitely my take. One way to think about it is if we expect there to be extreme weather, and we see it even now, we're in the middle of an extreme cold spell right now. If we expect weather to be extreme, why would we build a power grid that's dependent on the weather?
That's right, in untested and extreme conditions. Anyway, I want to thank the panelists. And now, if we could invite any elected officials present wants to make some comments, we're going to do that before we go to brief closing statements, and then hopefully wrap it up in about 15 minutes. And first, we're going to have Maryland State Senator Mary Beth Carrozza. Senator Carrozza.
Me too. I wake up every day.
For the record, I am Mary Beth Carrozza. As the proud state senator representing Ocean City and Maryland's coast, I want to thank all three of you for holding this hearing on the impact of offshore wind industrialization off Maryland's coast. This has been a tremendous opportunity for my and our shared constituents to hear all of this expert testimony. I first expressed my concerns about these projects off Ocean City during a Maryland Public Service Commission's public meeting back in 2017. This was before the offshore wind energy developers dramatically expanded the number and the size of the turbines. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management's own environmental impact statement study further convinced me that the potential negative impacts of offshore wind industrialization off Maryland's coast outweighs the many promised benefits by European-based offshore wind developers. The report validates many of my concerns in their own words that what they call unavoidable adverse impacts, including high-impact hydraulic hammers pounding the seafloor during the 3 years of construction of the 123 structures, increased risk of accidents due to changes in navigational patterns, gear loss, personal injury, damage to boats, and possible oil spills. Substantial negative impact on commercial and recreational fishing, which we have heard in detail today. With my prior work experience at the Pentagon and the U.S. Senate Homeland Security Committee, I especially am sensitive to the security and safety concerns raised by the Department of Defense, including the detrimental effect of wind turbines on existing radar systems by false alarms and misdetection of real targets. The impact on the local economy and tourism and the negative effects on marine life, fishing, and the military taken together are unacceptable risks. We are at the point where we need a hardcore reality check. Recent results from other offshore wind energy projects have revealed that the business model for these projects has fallen short of projections, with wind developers either halting construction or asking the government for additional subsidies to make up for the projected cost increases. Here in the state of Maryland, we're facing difficult budget shortfalls with a $322 million structural gap in the FY25 budget, ballooning to a $1.8 billion deficit in FY28 and a $2.1 billion deficit the following year. Federal COVID relief money is exhausted. We simply cannot afford nor accept offshore wind developers coming back to the state or the federal government for more subsidies. More subsidies for the development of these offshore wind energy projects are unaffordable and unacceptable to my and our shared constituents and to most Marylanders. As someone who lives in Ocean City and was raised here and now represents Maryland's coast in the Maryland State Senate, I believe it is my moral obligation to do all I can to protect our shore way of life, which today is threatened by the projected and documented negative impacts from these proposed and expansive offshore wind energy projects. Thank you for giving me and my constituents, our shared constituents, this opportunity to participate in this very important congressional hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Carosa. Delegate Wayne Hartman.
Good afternoon. I'm Delegate Wayne Hartman, and I represent District 38C, which includes Ocean City. First of all, I want to thank the three of you for being here today and taking your time to have this hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses. The information has just been overwhelming, the amount of information that came in today, and just the newness of some of the information to us, and how vital it's going to be to this project. And you know, the more information we have, the more real this gets. So. You know, here we are in Ocean City. The town is named specifically after its best asset, the Atlantic Ocean. So Maryland's offshore wind projects are a significant cause for concern among the residents and property owners of Ocean City and the surrounding area. The vast majority of constituents that have contacted me on this are adamantly opposed to the implementation of offshore wind projects. I'll say that again, the vast majority adamantly opposed to offshore wind projects. There are many concerning factors such as environmental impacts that we heard about, the economic impacts, the visual pollution, the effects on marine and wildlife, and the overall industrialization of the Atlantic Ocean. While the town of Ocean City has many amenities to offer, people from all over the country come to Ocean City for the ocean and its natural beauty. As a father, and my favorite role as a grandfather, we must protect, and that is my favorite title as a grandfather, we must protect what we have personally enjoyed for many years, and we need to protect that for our future generations. As you can see, the windmills that are proposed are taller than the tallest buildings in Ocean City. As a resident, a business owner, as a former council member, as a delegate, and as a member of the Maryland Tourism Development Board, I understand the value of tourism. According to a study from North Carolina State University, 55% of vacation renters would not return to their vacation destination if turbines were visible. 55% would not return. This is very concerning for the future of economic development in Ocean City, as tourism accounts for the large percentage of the local economy. The Mid-Atlantic region has witnessed an unprecedented number of whale and dolphin deaths over the recent years. The construction and operation of the proposed offshore windmills will create physical barriers for marine life, interfere with migratory patterns, and produce underwater noise disturbances. Maryland's taxpayers are currently subsidizing this endeavor, and many express concern that there is not a positive return on investment, which we so well heard today. Offshore wind will be detrimental to our local economy and life as we know it today. This damage will be irrevocable, and I appreciate what you're doing, and I urge you to continue the good fight that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Hartman. Worcester County Commissioner Joseph Mitrosik.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here and able to speak on behalf of the Worcester County Commissioners today. Since commercial interests began plans to develop a wind farm off the coast of Ocean City, the Worcester County Commissioners have staunchly opposed the project. There are too many irreversible, catastrophic impacts to sea life, Worcester County citizenry, and local and state economies to greenlight this reckless venture. Last year, roughly 30 dead whales, including the critically endangered right whale and dolphins, washed up on the mid-Atlantic shores. We suspect that geotechnical testing is responsible for this unprecedented destruction of these highly intelligent mammals. And we are concerned with the effect of the introduction of a continuous electromagnetic field from the cabling on the ocean floor would have on all marine life in the future. As a novice offshore fisherman myself, I found great honoring that NOAA had introduced new speed limits for recreational and commercial vessels along the Atlantic coast to protect the North Atlantic right whales, thereby possibly crippling our offshore commercial fishing as well as our offshore charter fishing businesses, and now are asked to consider U.S. Wind's request for a letter of authorization for incidental take regulations moving forward over the next 5 years, basically asking for permission to kill our marine mammals. Offshore wind entities rely on taxpayers' subsidies to fund their uncertain startups. This fragility is becoming increasingly evident as wind energy companies have reevaluated and canceled plans to consider similar projects to the north due to rising costs. If U.S. Wind lacks the financial wherewithal to cover startup costs, it is unfair for Maryland taxpayers to be made responsible to fund them. As I mentioned before, our waterways are home to commercial fishing fleets and a dynamic, world-renowned sport fishing industry that depend on the ocean's bounty. Our county is home to Assateague Island and the resort town of Ocean City, which attract more than 8 million visitors annually. Our fishing industries would cease to exist if electromagnetic fields around the turbines and the cabling disrupt the migratory patterns of the sea life. Our local and state economies would be decimated if visitors abandoned our hotels, our eateries, and our shops in favor of ocean towns where pristine ocean views are not marred by metal turbines towering above the horizon in all directions. There are simply too many long-term environmental and economic impacts to allow this fledgling industry to set up shop off of Maryland's coast and threaten the health of the U.S. coastal waters. I thank you all for being here and allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ocean City Mayor Rick Meehan.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. And I want to thank all the expert witnesses on the panel. I think you enlightened us with some of the information that we haven't even heard before or isn't talked about and is so important, I think, for the residents and the visitors and everybody in the state of Maryland to hear so they can adequately look at how they perceive these projects and their future here off Ocean City. The discussion of wind turbines off the coast of Ocean City goes back as far as 2010. Yet this is the first time a committee from the federal government has actually held a hearing here in Ocean City where our residents and our property owners who are the most affected by these projects have a chance to speak with you and to hear from you. And I think they deserve a round of applause. Ocean City is the only municipality in the state located on the Atlantic coast. People live here, invest here, and visit Ocean City to enjoy the beach, the ocean, and the pristine view of the horizon off of our coast. This is the only city in the state of Maryland where you can experience the sunrise over the Atlantic each and every day. What is being proposed would destroy what 26,000 property owners and 8 million visitors enjoy each year, not just today, but for future generations. Building turbines closer than 26 nautical miles from our coast, or even more disturbing, as close as 10 miles from our shoreline, would destroy that national phenomenon forever. The sunrise over the Atlantic would look like a backdrop from Star Wars, and that's exactly what it would look like. All you have to do is look at the renderings. It was 7 years ago this April, and Senator Carrozza mentioned this, that I attended a meeting held by the Public Service Commission in Berlin. And that was the first time I saw the renderings of what U.S. Wind was proposing. And at the time, those were 4 megawatt or possibly 6 megawatt turbines and approximately 450 feet tall. I stated our opposition to the size and locations of those turbines at that time, 7 years ago. Our concerns fell on deaf ears. Today, those same turbines are now 18 megawatt turbines and approximately 940 or maybe 1,065 feet in height, and they're proposed for the same locations. Our concerns continue to fall on deaf ears. U.S. Wind has yet to do an economic analysis of the effect of this project on the economy of Ocean City. Why has this not been done? What is also being ignored is the revenue that Ocean City sends, millions of dollars, to both the state and the federal government each year. We only have one industry in Ocean City, and that's tourism. Why would the state or the federal government want to unnecessarily jeopardize our future? Why would they want to do that? I believe it was Delegate Hartman that referenced the Carolina study that showed that 55% of the people surveyed would not return if those turbines were visible, even if they were offered a discount in their rental. The important thing about that survey, it wasn't just a broad survey done on the internet where they asked anybody from anywhere in the United States to comment. This survey only included those visitors that actually rented oceanfront property on North Carolina beaches. It was relevant. Can you imagine what effect that would have on our property values or our industry of tourism? Over the past 7 years, we've learned more about the concerning issues that face our commercial fishermen, our recreational fishermen, national security, and the other environmental interests that were discussed here today. We have listened, but again, as their concerns, as well as ours, have been ignored. Hopefully, today we'll rectify some of that. Today, I'm here representing our 26,000 property owners, our residents and visitors, as we stand with these other entities and these congressmen in total opposition to the proposed U.S. wind project and to the environmental assessment statement, impact statement presented by BOEM. The questions far outweigh the answers. Our future is at stake. And what I can tell you is, God forbid these turbines are built, the public is going to ask local, state, and federal officials, how did you ever let this happen? I can assure you that's what's going to take place. And Congressman Van Drew, when you said stay the course, stay in the battle, what I can assure you is that the town of Ocean City will not back down for our opposition to these projects and to our future here in Ocean City. We will not back down. After reviewing the environmental assessment, BOEM comes back with a record of a decision that's favorable. The town of Ocean City will challenge that decision, and we will file suit. You know what? We only get one chance to get this right, and this is our chance, and we all have to make sure we follow through. I want to thank you, gentlemen, again for being here today. And more importantly, on behalf of all of our citizens, I want to thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Meehan. We'll go to brief closing statements, and then we'll bring an end to the forum. Mr. Smith?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank you for putting this all together, but more importantly in Washington, for being such a force for clarity, asking the hard questions as you have done for so long. And I do believe the time is coming where we will prevail. This is imploding, as we're seeing with some of the folks that have pulled out, including Orsted, just a little further north of here. But I just want to say, far too many politicians in that state, federal, and local, including and especially government bureaucrats at BOEM and other federal agencies, continue to ignore or to denigrate any and all information and evidence that does not comport with their narrative, and it is a false narrative. The public is absolutely ill-served by groupthink, by scientists and bureaucrats, an environment that punishes anyone who doesn't toe the party line. And that goes in the chain of command at the Department of Defense, where people would absolutely be speaking out. Do you want to be admiral someday? You want to be a general? You want to serve at the Pentagon? Shut up. And that is exactly what is happening right now. It's unseemly, it smacks of intellectual dishonesty, and it puts our ocean environment, sea life, job loss, on fishing, commercial as well as recreational. I just chaired a hearing in October. We had Ian Urbina, who runs the Outlaw Ocean Project, testify. I chair the China Commission. And this man, 4 years investigating the ships, the vessels that China uses, the Chinese Communist Party, to fleece the oceans of their food. And then they're processed in China using North Koreans, which is against our law, and using Uyghurs, who are unfortunately being subjected to genocide by Xi Jinping. 357 of the 751 of the ships that they investigated, they actually put people on them at great risk, were being forced to be there. It's just incredible. Half of all the shrimp, not the shrimp, the squid fleet was found to have forced labor. We're now going to say to our commercial fishermen, you're out of business. I wrote Department of Homeland Security, VA, DOD. If you go to our PXs, they're filled with fish. You know where they're coming from? By and large, they're coming from China with forced labor. We need to increase our ability to have our fishermen make their living, and we're not seeing that at all. We've all heard about the importance of radars. How dare the DOD continue to be silent and gag themselves and not speak out robustly on this for the sake of our national security. So I just want to say again, you know, in a democracy of the governed, we have not given our consent to ruin our oceans and to put our national security at risk. And as the mayor pointed out, and I have it as well in my district, several shore towns, Point Pleasant, Seaside, Belmar, those beautiful oceanfront and near oceanfront properties will be degraded. People will lose their life savings, and people increasingly will not come and spend time at the shore. That's unconscionable, and this needs to be reversed. Thank you so much, Andy, Dr. Harris, for what you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Dr. Van Drew.
Thank you. So again, I know we keep thanking each other, but you know, this is a hard fight, so you got to keep thanking each other to keep each other going. I do want to thank Dr. Harris for having this here today. He was kind enough, as was Chris, to come into my district, as I mentioned before, in Wildwood, and we held one of these a while back, and there will be more. They're both great congressmen. I also want to make a deal with Dr. Harris. If he does a vacation in Ocean City, New Jersey, I'll do a vacation in Ocean City, Maryland. But I want to thank you all, and I mean it. It's going to be up to you. You really do make the difference. We showed that with Orsted leaving. I just want to go over, though, real quickly. Let's just think about this thing. Our national security is going to be diminished. Our food chain and supply is going to be diminished. We're going to rely on foreign countries for energy and for food. We're going to hurt our tourism. We're going to destroy our whales. We're going to hurt and destroy our environment. We're going to kill our fishing industry. We're going to increase our taxes, and we're going to radically increase our utility rates. And why is it? Why is it? Again, I said it in the beginning, and I'll say it now. I don't care if I offend somebody. It's about making lots and lots of money. The only thing green about these projects is the green that these multinational corporations and big shots are going to put in their pockets. And it's wrong. It's morally wrong. You know, I talked about before, I quote it a lot because it happens so often. I see it in so many different ways serving in Congress. I'd like the mayor to know I started out as a mayor. I learned a lot from that. It's a little bit different in Congress. And you see all the time, rules for thee, you know, what's good for you, and I'm going to teach you what you should do in your lives, but not for me. And that's the way these folks are looking at it, and it is very wrong. So I tell you, keep up the fight. Ocean City, Maryland is worth it. Your beautiful beaches, your great people, your fishing, your ocean, your tourism, just everything about it. It's a great place. We can't lose it. Rally your elected officials. Rally your neighbors. Rally your friends. Sue the companies. I mean it. Get people together. Create funds. Have fundraisers. Sue these people. Hold them up in any way that you can. Fight hard. Don't give up. Don't succumb, and you will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Van Drew. I want to thank everyone who is here, everyone who's watching it on the live stream. I want to thank the panelists. Especially want to thank my two colleagues for coming down from New Jersey. This issue knows no state boundary. It knows no state boundary. Very briefly, we ought to think long and hard as a nation as we begin the industrialization of our ocean off the mid-Atlantic coast. There's no question about it. We heard about a lot of the problems today. We heard about the viewscape problem, the economic effect on local businesses, the Coast Guard search and rescue, shipping channels, Department of Defense issues, NASA issues, commercial and recreational fishing issues, horseshoe crabs, marine deaths, exorbitant cost of offshore wind, the list goes on and on. Bottom line, this is not ready for prime time. I want to thank you all for being here. To educate yourself so you can educate your neighbors, you can educate people, because you're not hearing this from the entities, as Mr. Smith and Dr. Van Drew suggest, these large corporations, foreign-owned corporations, who are just here to make money off the U.S. taxpayer and electric ratepayer, and they're not telling the whole truth. So hopefully you've heard a little more of the truth today. Take it to heart. We'll keep up the fight. I'll do what needs to be done in Washington with my colleagues here. We'll, Senator and Delegate, what you need to do in Annapolis, you've got to do to hold this off before we make a mistake that we would regret. Anyway, thank you very much, and the forum is concluded.
Would have been great.
Yeah, you and Mayor, nice to meet you.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Yeah, it's very important, and it's about information, getting the information out to the public. I see people.
Welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
I talked to a guy walking in today.